Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to C4C Apologetics. I'm your host, Danny, and we got another interview today because it's Monday, and that's what we do on Mondays. We do interviews because you guys get tired of hearing from me, so you want to hear from key experts out there in the biblical field, and that's what we have today. Today, we have with us Dr. Tommy Ice. He's the executive director of the Pre-Trib Research Center. That's all I'm going to say about him. I'm going to ask Tommy to give a little bit more about himself, anything he'd like to share, ministries. And Tommy, I just thank you for being with us. What do you want to tell the folks about you?
Well, I worked for 25 years with Tim LaHaye. He's the one that founded the Pre-Trib Research Center, and I was the full-time guy with him on that issue. In fact, Tim LaHaye received an award from Wheaton as the most influential Christian in the second half of the 20th century because he had done so many things and things which I won't go over right now. But so we have an annual meeting. We just had in December our 31st annual meeting where all these scholars and people come together and we discuss the pre-trib rapture and issues relating to that. And it's always a good time for 2.5 days there. It's specifically academic oriented because there's plenty of non-academic prophecy conferences out there. And so just about everybody who's anybody in the pre-tribal world has been there over the 31 years. And I was a pastor for 17 years. I went to Dallas Seminary and back when it was fairly good. And and stuff. And I have 3 sons and 2 are in the ministry.
Nice. Now, are you a military vet as well?
I guess I'm a National Guard, no good,
No good, NG.
15 years in the Army National Guard.
Well, that's wonderful. I thank you for your service, Tommy. Today, what we're talking about, obviously, we got the executive director of the Pre-Trib Research Center, and this guy knows a wealth of knowledge as far as this topic is concerned, more than me. And so what we're looking at today is the rapture. And so this is one, Tommy, today we're just going to settle the issue once and for all. I know it's been going around for thousands of years, but I mean, can't you just give the answer and it settles the debate today? What do you think?
Well, yeah, but some people don't have ears that hear.
Oh, that's true. You're already pulling out scripture on me. I like that. So as we get into it, the first thing I want to really ask you, and I think there's really 4 main views as far as when the rapture is going to occur. Now, there may be nuances within some of these views. What are your thoughts? Are there 3? Are there 4? What are some of these main views people are known for, and what do they mean?
Well, first of all, let me just say this. There's 3 basic views of eschatology known as amillennialism, meaning we're in the millennium now. That's a Catholic view and many Protestant views. Then there's postmillennialism, which believes that the church is going to bring in the kingdom over the years, and the majority, if not all, of humanity will be converted. There'll be a rebellion at the end, and then Christ will return after the long period of time of Christ's reign through the church on the earth.
Okay.
But all these views on so they don't have a view of the rapture.
Okay.
They just have the second coming. And within premillennialism, there are at least 4 or 5 views. And one is the pre-trib rapture, which we hold. That is that the rapture will occur before the 70th week of Daniel, which is the tribulation.
Okay.
And the reason is because the 70th week is the completion of God's plan relating to Israel, where he uses Israel as his instrument. That's why you have the 144,000 Jewish evangelists, the 2 witnesses, etc. Okay, then you have mid-tribulationism. And as one of my professors at Dallas used to say, it's kind of like a guy that put on a blue top during the Civil War and a gray bottom and got shot from both sides. The mid-trib view is hardly anybody holds that view anymore. And it was developed after pre-tribulationism, by the way.
Okay.
And then you have what is called the pre-wrath rapture view, which is the 3/4 rapture view, basically. Okay. And it was developed. I can't think of the guy's name. Do you remember?
Was it Rosenthal was an early influencer of that?
Rosenthal was the champion of it, but he didn't come up with it.
No.
And there was a guy who came up with it up in Michigan, a wealthy guy, and he rejected pre-trib and he rejected post-trib, and so he had to come up with mediating view, and he came up with 3/4 rapture view. And he was very wealthy, and I remember when I was a pastor, he sent out a book to all pastors and theologians and stuff, free book, and then he paid for it and started all these organizations to promote it and stuff. And had he not been wealthy, we probably never would have heard of that view.
Yeah. Huh.
But then there's post-tribulationism, which, as I say, before pre-tribulationism came on the scene, everybody who was premillennial was post-tribulational, because they didn't see two events. Or if they did, it would be what we call the yo-yo rapture, where you're raptured right before the tribulation in order to come back down at the second coming and stuff. But basically, the second view in church history to have developed was a pre-trib view. Just throwing that out.
I like that word picture, the yo-yo rapture.
Yes.
I see those in those diagrams, but so as far as these views are concerned, I'm a pre-trib guy, and one of the things that resonates with me as far as pre-trib is concerned is the teaching and the understanding of what's known as imminency of Jesus Christ. Can you speak a little bit about that? What does the doctrine of imminence mean as far as the rapture is concerned, and what does it tell us?
Okay, the doctrine of imminency. I was going to read a statement here, but I think I lost it.
Okay.
But well, it means that Christ could come at any moment. Okay. There's no intervening event that must take place, and you can't have that and hold to any of the other rapture views.
Right.
So if Christ can come at any moment, it's been 2,000 years, then it has to be pre-trib.
Right, because the other tribulational views, you're going to see either the apostasy, you're going to see the Antichrist rise up, the mark of the beast, all these other signs that are going to happen. Yes. You're going to see a peace treaty with Israel that's going to be made by the Antichrist. And so imminency, from my understanding is, he could come today, he could come 5 years from now. And so I think everybody's really tying when the return of Christ is going to happen based off the signs, and getting confused with the return of Christ versus the rapture of Christ.
Well, the early church clearly believed in imminency.
Okay.
And most of them thought they were in the tribulation. And there are a couple of guys that made some statements that sounded pre-trib, and even we have a guy that's been doing research and reading the 500 volumes of Greek and Latin church history that have never been translated into English. And he's come up with, we're up to about 70 pre-trib rapture statements, all the way from the late, well, actually the 200s, all the way up, to Darby, because everyone understands the role of Darby, and they're solidly throughout the church ages. Different people have held this view.
So it's not that Darby invented this. This is a view that was held back in the early church period.
Well, yeah, but they were in a different situation. But many thought they were in the tribulation because of the intense persecution that they were experiencing. So they believed in imminency, though. See, that's the point.
Oh, yeah.
The early church believed in imminency, and that Christ could come at any moment and rescue them from their situations. But In 313, Constantine Christianized, the Roman Empire, and we went from about 8% Christians to around 98%.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Within a 35-year period. And of course, then amillennialism came on the scene because they thought they were in the kingdom.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense, especially when you're looking at the rise of the Catholic Church under Constantine and things like that.
Exactly.
So one of the things, as far as, again, I'm a pre-trib guy, and imminency is a big thing for me as far as proving and revealing the pre-trib rapture. But when I look at passages like John 20:21, I believe it is, where Jesus tells Peter that he's going to be crucified, but yet there's still words before Peter's crucifixion saying that Jesus Christ could rapture the church at any moment. Would Peter's crucifixion not be a sign that needed to be fulfilled before Jesus returned? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, since John was written around AD 80, that was something that had, long passed.
Okay.
In other words, Peter, all the 12 disciples died before AD 70, except for John.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So that wasn't an issue, really. He was just reporting what Jesus told him.
Okay, so that's just more or less, he's just quoting Peter when he's
Right.
writing that. Okay, that makes sense. Other one that I think of too, is like Israel's union in 1948, I believe it is. Like Ezekiel talks about Israel becoming a statehood. Now, I don't know if some people pull this out saying, oh, this needed to happen first, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus Christ can't come back until then, does it? Does this have any role in imminency as well?
Well, the rapture could have happened, and then Israel could have become a nation. There could have, in fact, I lean toward the view that Arnold Fruchtenbaum holds, that the Jews leave the land in the middle of the tribulation, and it talks about burning the instruments for 7 years. So it's very likely the rapture could happen at least 3.5 years before the tribulation even starts. So Clarence Larkin, in his book 110 years ago, said that he thought there would be a 50-year interval between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. And so, that in their minds, they were solving the question that you just asked with an interval of time between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. And we have loose ends even today, even though Israel's been a nation for over 70 years, that need to be developed until the tribulation could start with the signing of the covenant between the revived Roman Antichrist and the nation of Israel.
Right, definitely. And they need a temple too, because if the Antichrist is going to defile a temple, that needs to be built. So it's fascinating seeing what's going on over in Israel with the Temple Institute and the Red Heifer that came back online a few months back, and just the Levites and everything for the temple process ready to go with the different instruments. And so it's fascinating to see where we are in history.
Yeah, I wrote a book with Randall Price in the early 90s called Ready to Rebuild.
Yeah, okay.
And we interviewed, Randy speaks Hebrew, and he interviewed 2 rabbis that have never talked to a Gentile back in those days.
Oh, wow.
In Hebrew. And they all were looking forward to the temple being rebuilt. And the general secular Israel is afraid of the temple being rebuilt. And so they're really down on it because they're afraid that it will bring wrath from the other nations down on them and from the Muslims.
Right, because they got the Dome of the Rock that's up near that area by the Western Wall.
It's got to go. That's where, see, that when we delved into this history, and the Dome of the Rock was built by Omar to preserve the site of the temple. And, they didn't have photographs or anything back in those days. And they built what they thought was something, like a temple. There's nothing else like it in Islam. And so it was built to preserve, early in Islam, when they didn't have all these traditions against that.
Right.
They built that in order to preserve the site of the temple.
Huh. Fascinating. But yeah, I can imagine the concern that like the Orthodox, well, not the Orthodox, but the secular Jews would have trying to rebuild this temple with the Islamic presence that is currently there. I mean, you see what's going on even this past week over in Israel. As far as these different views of the rapture, now you're the director of the Pre-Trib Research Center, so I imagine, like you already said, you're a pre-trib guy. But what are some of the strongest reasons why you're a pre-trib believer?
Well, one of the strongest reasons is because the 70th week of Daniel is for Israel. Okay. It says that in Daniel 9:24, for your people in your city, who's Daniel's people, Israel, and his city, Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And it gives 6 infinitives in verse 24 that have to be completed until the Messiah will come. Well, at the end of it just so happened that on the end of the 69th week of years, Jesus, that ended on the day of the triumphal entry. Mm-hmm. And it says in verse 26, after these things, and he'll be cut off and have nothing. And that's an excellent description of his death, and have nothing. So at the end of the 69 weeks of years, none of these 6 infinitives from verse 24 were fulfilled.
Right.
And so we now know from the New Testament, it says 4 times that the church age was a period of time hidden. Mm-hmm. It's not ever referred to in the Old Testament. And it was introduced the night before Jesus died in the upper room discourse in John 14:1-3, where he also introduces the rapture. And everything that he talks about, 2/3 of the way through John 13, when Judas leaves the room, is brand new church age truth all the way through chapter 17. Chapter 17 was on the Mount of Mount of Olives. But all of that is, he introduces the church for the first time. Mm-hmm. And it's, a few hours later, he was killed. Mm-hmm. And because he was setting things up to deal with the new church age that was coming, and those mysteries, which were always part of God's plan. Right. They're not mysterious. They're simply hidden parts of God's plan that he now began to reveal. Mm-hmm. And so that's the logic for the pre-trib rapture, is in order for God to finish his plan for Israel, mm-hmm. which there are probably thousands, but definitely hundreds of prophecy passages that, mainly the book of Revelation, for example, chapters 4 through the end, right. about things that are supposed to happen. And by the way, there's over 550 allusions in the book of Revelation to the Old Testament. And the book of Revelation, in a sense, organizes all of these unfulfilled prophecies scattered throughout Psalms and the Old Testament, and even Deuteronomy and places like that. And so it organizes a lot of these passages into a sequential thing once you understand the book of Revelation and identify the location of those Old Testament passages. Every Old Testament prophet, except for Jonah, has a future prophecy about relating to Israel. So that sets us up for the events of the tribulation. And so the church age has hardly any prophecy in it. It just has a description or so about the course of the age. It will be, the church will grow and get global, but it'll become increasingly apostate as time goes on. And there are 7 major passages in the New Testament epistles. There, one in James and the other in the last epistles of Paul and Peter, talking about the end time, the apostasy, and how the church will become increasingly apostate, even though it will become global. And so Christendom means anything related to Christianity, is the largest religion in the world by over 500 million over Islam.
Wow. So one of the arguments I've heard, as far as like a mid-trib view or a pre-wrath type view, is this focus on the trumpet focus on the trump. Now in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we're told that, with the trump of God in the middle of that rapture passage is when the rapture is going to happen. Is that the same trumpet as in 1 Corinthians 15, as well as in 1 Thessalonians 4:6? Are they the same ones? And do these tie into the trumpet judgments of Revelation? Or is that trumpet in the rapture passage in chapter 4 of Thessalonians something completely different?
Yeah, it is completely different context, all of this. In fact, the last trumpet, the seventh trumpet, gives rise to the seal judgments, or I'm sorry, the bowl judgments, which are 7. It just doesn't make any sense. And so that is a passage that is simply saying, like we used to say in school, the last bell.
Oh,
well, every school day there was a last bell, day after day after day. And so this is how it identifies the end of the church age. In other words, that in fact, in 1 Thessalonians 4, the major rapture passage, by the way, Paul's first epistle was Galatians. And then his next 2 epistles were 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So right off the bat, so to speak, he introduces the rapture and the church's eschatology there in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And so you have the rapture that ends the church age, and this is why you have this kind of sophisticated program of God, where it's the only time in history he's got 2 peoples of God, so to speak, that he's functioning with. The church, because of Israel's disobedience, is set aside, even though there's always been Jewish. By the way, it's estimated 30% in the first century of Jews accepted Christ as their Messiah.
Oh, wow.
And so that it was a minority, but it was a significant one. In fact, the first 15 bishops of Jerusalem were all Jewish. And so there's always been Jewish believers in the church. And I've got a friend who went back to Israel, and a Jewish guy, in 1948. And he said there are only 6 Jewish Christians in Israel in 1948. And now there are tens of thousands of Jewish Christians that will be taken at the rapture. And as usual, I forgot where I'm going.
No, you're.
So what was the question?
We were talking about the trumpet, and you were talking about the last school bell every day, and how the trump in 1 Thessalonians 4 is really calling out the end of the church age. And it's
that's right. It's got 3 events. It's got the call, or the word from God the Father down. Like we've both been in the military, just like our commander would give the call, and it passed down through the sergeants, and then it was given to the troops. You see, it's something like that, in my opinion. Where it goes down through the echelon, and that trumpet is, as it's the overall command, at least in the Army. I don't know if y'all did much of that in the Air Force. But,
we were drinking our coffee, eating our cinnamon buns.
Yeah, exactly. Doing your duties,
our virtual PT,
informal way. But having been in the Army, that they would have this echelon that they would pass commands from down, and I think it's something like that. And so that trumpet is when the action is going to actually take place.
Okay, now getting on to the pre-wrath view. Now, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, the pre-wrath view argues that the church is going to go through part of the tribulation period. But when God's wrath is begun to pour out, that's when the church is raptured, is right before God's wrath is poured out. And I think they get it out of 1 Thessalonians 5:9. But is that accurate? And is all of the tribulation God's wrath, or only the part in Revelation that is specifically said to be God's wrath?
Well, the statement at the end of chapter 6, where you have the first parts of the judgment, the seal judgments. It has a statement that's referring to all the seal judgments. And twice it calls it the wrath of God. And so they have to overlook that or come up with some different interpretation. But I believe that that statement, which is given during the sixth seal judgment, which is a summary of all the seal judgments. Therefore, the wrath of God begins at the beginning of the tribulation with the white horse, which is the rise of the Antichrist coming on the scene at the beginning of the tribulation. And that right there disproves their view.
Okay.
And this is why you have a lot of, so you have before the pre-wrath view, you had others who tried to say that wrath only began with the sixth seal judgment. And so they will put the first half, if they're mid-trib, is only the first 5, but only 4 seal judgments, you see, occur. And so they can say the second half, for example, in mid-tribulationism is the wrath of God. And so the 3/4 rapture people that you're asking about kind of do the same type of thing.
So it's essentially a mid-trib position just later in the period.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you already talked a little bit about that. I don't know if you want to say anything else, but Daniel 9:24. Now, from what I understand, like you said, the 70th week of Daniel has everything to do with his people and his city, the Jews in Jerusalem, and their 6 purposes for the tribulation period. 3 of them are positive and 3 of them are negative. And Dr. Arnold Fruitbaum points that out very well. And I believe part of that has to do with the unpardonable sin that the Jewish people committed. But so does 924 play roles within the rapture debate? You sort of talked about it earlier, because the tribulation period has only to do really with the Jewish people. Could you speak just a little more on that topic?
Yeah, well, that it does have a role to play, because if the first 69 weeks of Daniel were for Jerusalem and Israel, Daniel's people, well, the 70th week also would be for them as well. And so, it's like a movie. History is like a movie where at the last minute, the good guys win, so to speak. And so you see Israel in unbelief for most of its history. I'm talking about corporately. There's obviously many individual and other examples, but in fact, we learn from goodness, what is that? No, it's Hosea, I think. 3 days before the second coming is when the Jews will be saved. Is that, if I've got that passage?
Hosea brings that up?
Yes. It says in Hosea 5:15, I will go away and return to my place. This is the Lord speaking. Until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. And then it says, 6:1, come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days, and he will raise us up on the 3rd day. Now, most people take that to be 3,000 years, and stuff, but I take it literally, that we may live before him. So let us press on to know the Lord. His going forth is as certain as the dawn, and he will come to us like the rain, like the spring rain watering the earth. And so apparently after 2 days, they'll confess their sin during these 2 days, and then they will rise up on the 3rd day. In other words, and this is what Romans 11:25-27 talks about. So if we go over there, and by the way, it talks about 2/3 of the Jews being purged out in Zechariah 9, I believe it is, or 12:9. And but Romans 11 says, for I do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, of the mystery. So the mystery means that it's a totally new revelation, not found anywhere else in the Bible. It's not mysteries in the Bible are not mysterious. They're simply new information. Lest you be wise in your own estimation that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness or the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And so this tells us that there is a set number of Gentiles ordained to be saved during the church age. And thus all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion and he will remove ungodliness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So that we learn from other Old Testament passages is once the 2/3 had been purged out through the process of tribulation, and that's one of the reasons for the tribulation, is to purge out the non-elect Jews. It's also Revelation 3:10. Goodness, in my memory, once again, let me look at that passage. Gives us another purpose for the tribulation. And it says, because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I will also keep you from the hour of testing. So this is a big pre-trib rapture statement. That hour, so he's talking about the tribulation, which is about to come upon the whole world to test those who dwell upon the earth. And we call those earth dwellers. And that's the first of 11 uses in the book of Revelation. And when you read all of those passages about the earth dwellers, that's the term for unbelievers in the tribulation. Not a single earth dweller ever gets saved. In fact, the last two references to the earth dwellers says, because their names were not found written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So that is one of the things, to demonstrate that an unbeliever is an unbeliever is an unbeliever. It takes, the reason you and I believe is the Holy Spirit opened our eyes and enabled us to believe. And therefore, we're believers, and it's the same for any believer down through church, through history.
Okay, so
once again, I forgot what the question was, but
no, you were very clearly explaining Daniel 9:24 and the role of the 70th week and its purpose within a pre-rapture view. And then you made mention to remnant. And again, as a pre-trib guy, I'm pre-trib, for my studies. There's one other question I've wrestled with at times. And it goes to the distinction between the church and the Jewish people. So the church is the bride of Christ. Israel is the wife of Jehovah. And so I believe the Jewish people are part of the church, but the church is not part of the Jewish people, right? And so maybe I'm wrong on that. But if the rapture raptures all the believers before the tribulation period, does that mean every Jewish believer is raptured as well, and there's no remnant during the tribulation period? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, all believers, Jew or Gentile, will be raptured.
Okay.
And they will not, because they're part of the body of Christ. But then, as I talked about that interval between the rapture thing, I think people will start getting saved. Just think of this. A lot of, obviously God has to open their hearts. And there'll be a lot of people who are close to believing, but didn't quite believe. And I believe millions of people will start getting saved during that interval. And, because most of them apparently, or many of them, will be martyred during the 7-year tribulation. They'll be killed for their faith. And therefore, you have a whole new program starting. And so God, I believe, in the first half of the tribulation, raises up the 144,000 in the first half. And that's part of the evangelism that's going on. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, says he was one who was born out of due time. And I think that means that he's early born. In other words, a surprise. And I think the 144,000 are going to be like 144,000 Apostle Pauls.
Oh, okay.
Preaching the gospel all around the world. And then you have the two witnesses in the first half of the tribulation that are going to be preaching to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, they're going to be supernaturally protected for the first 3.5 years. Then God allows them to be killed. And then after 3 days, they're having a party. The world is so tired of them. And so they, as you know, the Jews and the Arabs, they bury a person on the day they die.
Mm-hmm.
They don't let their body go past 24 hours, except for unusual reasons. And so therefore it was an insult to let their bodies lie in the street for 3.5 days. And so they're having a party. They're so happy these guys are gone. And then God resurrects them, as you know, the scripture says, and they're shocked, ends the party. And then they are raptured. It's the Greek word harpazo there, up into heaven. And so the second half of the tribulation is when the Antichrist goes into the temple, and he apparently has an agreement with Israel in the first half of the tribulation. But in the first half of the tribulation, half of the earth's population dies. But so the temporary peace is just with Israel there, not with the rest of the world. And then you have that thing in Matthew 24 that says, when you see the abomination which causes desolation, flee. And it says, don't even, if you got something on the side of the field, don't even get that. Why? Because they're going to go to Petra, and God's going to supernaturally preserve them like he did in the kind of the second wilderness warning, where he's going to provide food and clothing and all of that in Petra. And so you have all these detail, which the average Christian knows nothing about. And when you start taking the Bible seriously, and you start going over these, especially the prophets, the Old Testament prophets and everything, then you see a framework that's developed that the book of Revelation guides you through and expands upon all the details, and you have a pretty complicated thing. Whereas the church age doesn't have this kind of stuff.
And I think it's Micah talks about Basra, which is this other word for Petra, and then you get Revelation 12, where the woman gives birth to the child, and it takes 42 months later, 1260 days or something like that, and he flees into the wilderness where he's divinely protected. And so,
in fact, there's a village right next. I've been there. Called Basra. Now there's a Basra in Iraq. That's a large city, but this is a little village at the entry into what we call Petra. Petra was named around the time of Christ.
Now Petra, that's the city that we're familiar with in Indiana Jones.
Yes. By the way, I went to high school with that girl in that movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Maryland. My father worked in Washington, D.C. for 4 years, and
she was
in my high school class, Karen Allen. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I didn't know her, but there were only 1,000 in my graduating class. But
you said you're from Maryland?
No, I'm from Austin, Texas, and my father was director of state federal relations for the state of Texas for 4 years.
Okay. You mentioned D.C. I was like, oh, I'm from Maryland. I was like, I wonder where
you're from Maryland?
Yeah, out in Clinton.
Okay.
You familiar with Clinton?
Where that is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, we got out of there while getting was good. So
I lived in Seabrook.
I've never heard of Seabrook.
Lanham, Seabrook area.
Okay.
Awesome. Right outside the Beltway. But
okay. Beltway. All right. So understanding, the Jewish people, they will be raptured with the church, but during the 144,000 evangelistic campaign, and then the last sign of Jonah that Jesus spoke about to the Jewish people, the two witnesses, I could definitely see that being a conversion moment for the Jewish people. They're fleeing and they're protected until the end, when they will acknowledge Jesus and call for him back. Another question, I want to see if you had any other thoughts, but me and many other people believe that when the rapture does happen, that the Antichrist and the people are going to try to explain it away by UFOs and alien abductions. Are there any other hypotheses as far as how they'll be able to explain away the rapture besides UFOs and aliens?
I don't know of any others. Those have been the main things. We don't really know. I just saw the new Left Behind movie, which I thought was very, very good. I really think Tim LaHaye would have liked it.
Oh, really?
And he didn't like the first one, because they didn't give the gospel in it. But nevertheless, and he sued them to prevent them from doing more. But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I forget, they had some kind of thing, and then they said a second rapture happened, which I thought was very interesting, although it didn't really happen, but they were trying to help explain that away in that way. I thought that was pretty ingenious.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
Beyond the Space Brothers came and took them,
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Have you ever heard of was it the Philadelphia experiment many years ago?
No.
Apparently, sort of like the Manhattan Project, that was they worked on the atomic bomb. The Philadelphia experiment was supposedly this experiment that created invisibility, that there was a ship that was actually cloaked invisible, and they never found it again. Sort of like Bermuda Triangle, Devil's Triangle type stuff. So I don't know, maybe that's another theory too, sort of like the Philadelphia experiment, invisibility and Bermuda Triangle disappearances. But now it's fascinating. So pre-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, post-trib, any other trib that comes out. The last question, does it really matter what view a Christian holds to the tribulation? Yes. Why not?
Well, yes, it does, because if the Bible teaches a particular view and you don't hold that view, then you're not biblical.
Does it matter? I'm sorry, go on.
And I'm sure there are ramifications from that. See, that's why that's where imminency is developed from, because we have like a dozen passages where it teaches that we're looking for Christ. We're waiting for Christ. And if you're any other view of the rapture, you're waiting for the beginning, for the Antichrist, in essence. And the Antichrist has to come before Christ can come. So why do all of these passages tell you to wait, or they're waiting? It's always the term waiting is used, even in Titus 2:13, looking for the blessed hope. That is a form of waiting with a preposition on the front. So it's the same Greek word for waiting. It's just intensified. And really, looking is not a good translation. It's eagerly waiting, I would translate it, for the blessed hope and appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Yeah. And so that's who we are waiting for.
Man, I can't help but think of Peter. We just got done looking at Peter in his second epistle, talking about, be sure that you're found in him without spot and blameless, and so if you know that Jesus Christ is coming tomorrow, then we're going to clean everything up. But if we don't know when, we need to make sure we're living the good, faithful Christian life we're called to live. So
yeah, they've done studies, and workers that have either video cameras or the boss often comes in, they work harder and do a better job than people that don't have that kind of situation. And the same is true for us. In other words, if Christ could come at any moment, and it's been 2,000 years, so that, and we see Israel back in the land, we see what I call stage setting. And we're seeing the pieces that are going to be in place before, after the rapture. Israel's back in the land, for example, which I call God's super sign of the end times. And they've been there for over 70 something years. And we kind of, when that first happened, there was extreme excitement among Christians. But now it's been time enough for them to calm down, and all kinds of people say, well, I thought Jesus was going to come. And it's been 50. In fact, my wife and we've been married over 50 years, and we were hopeful that we'd be able to get married before the rapture occurred 50 years ago. There was tremendous expectation back in those days of the Jesus movement that we were involved in. And, and yet I see the Pre-Trib Rapture doctrine dying today increasingly because of all kinds of other reasons. And so people are even in the church are not expecting Christ to return at any moment.
No. Well, I appreciate, you answering all these questions for us on the pre-trib and all the other questions that we had regarding other views and imminency. As we close up this interview, are there any final words, comments, anything you want to button up before we say goodbye to everybody, Tommy?
Well, I think in the last 2 or 3 years in the United States, there's been a greater expectation for Christ's return, as we see down through history. Once you had 313 and the Roman Empire, take things over. That's when the expectation for Christ's return died out over the next 25 years. And the church was settling in. But there's always been a location from which Christianity has emanated from.
Okay.
And, you can look down through church history. And with the United States going pagan at a very fast rate, there's no longer going to be an area where that's come from. And that could be an indication that the Lord's ready to return. But on the other hand, for example, I've gone to Brazil 5 or 6 times over the years. And I remember 50 years ago, Brazil had 10% evangelicals. And now they're up to like 42% or something.
Oh, wow.
In 50 years, you see. And that has a lot of political ramifications. The president was an evangelical, and they stole the election from him, just like they did in the United States and things. And so they don't need, the world doesn't need American Christianity like it used to, or British Christianity before American Christianity, or the Byzantine Empire for 1,000 years that emanated Christianity and everything, because so many areas have matured and are ready on their own, no matter what happens. And so, it's another kind of illogical, I guess you'd say, but depends on your presuppositions, reason why I'm expecting Christ's return at any moment.
Yeah, I know we just recently looked at the whole aspect of the World Economic Forum and looking at the one world government establishment and COVID and what happened during that, according to the WEF's statements, then digital currency, digital IDs, social credit score. And I'm with you. I think the Lord's rapture is going to be coming a lot sooner than we expect it to.
See, all of that stage setting and preparation, like never before. And, I remember 50 years ago, you'd have 1 or 2 events happen a year and we'd get excited. Now, 1 or 2 events happens every day, it seems. And things are really moving on.
Yes, it does. And so with that, Tommy, I thank you for just spending your time with us. I know you're a very busy man, so we appreciate it. We'll have links for your ministries in the descriptions box below. And for everybody else, thanks for checking us out. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. And God bless.